Good morning, folks. Thank you for joining us. What is today? Friday, for our webinar about choosing a medical supplier with Dave Rock from Festimed. For those of you who may think you're having sound issues, if you have young kids, you may recognize the sound of PJ Masks in the background, which is a kids show that my daughter is currently watching on the iPad, and she does not want to leave this room, so you may hear bits of it while in my introduction. So, like I said, today's topic is medical, an important one that tends to incite, could be a strong word, but tends to provoke a lot of strong debate among people in the industry. Dave Rock runs a company called Festimed, among others, based in the UK and Ireland. He provides medical for all sorts of events, everything from full hospitals down to single crews and ambulances. So I'll let him explain all that. I've known Dave an awful long time, and what a lot of people don't realize is we knew each other long before either of our companies existed, back in Limerick here in Ireland, where Dave was working ambulances and I was working in a nightclub. So we know each other a long time. And I've seen Dave's presentation, so it's good. It should give everyone an insight into the things to possibly be considering when choosing an event medical supplier. I know in Ireland it can often be a case of ring one of the voluntary organizations and hope they can give you some level of cover, which I think from a professional perspective isn't the best approach. I think voluntaries are a key element of the overall event medical picture here, but the reliance on ring them up and let them send whatever they can send you probably isn't the way to approach things. So again, I have a feeling that might be something we end up getting into in the Q&A. I've had a few people send me in questions privately here already, so I think Q&A could be busy. As usual, the Q&A at the end, if anything comes up along the way, please ask the question in the chat. I might bring it to Dave if it makes sense to during the presentation, or we can track them. We'll keep them to the end if we need to. I'll turn on the raise your hand to speak functionality at the end as well. If anyone wants to come on, turn their mic on, turn their camera on, and get involved and ask a question. No pressure. It's there as an option if anyone wants it. Other than that, I think pretty much all that remains is me thanking the guys in Actavo, like I always do. Again, I think I said this back at the start, but I haven't said it much since. Actavo were keen that even though they were supporting this and helping towards the costs of equipment and the software and everything, they didn't want their logo plastered all over anything, or they didn't want it overtly branded or anything. So I try to make sure in each session that I give them a shout out. I think I've missed one where I forgot. But again, you probably know them. They're an infrastructure supplier. We work with them quite regularly, and Paul Griffin and the team in there have been very good in supporting us and supporting the industry with this series of webinars. So a thank you to them. Hopefully Dave is listening and can hear me and is nearly ready to start his presentation. Like I said, ask the questions in the chat as they come to you. We'll raise them with Dave during the presentation if it makes sense to, or if they can wait till the end, we'll do that and leave him in his flow. And otherwise, you probably may not see me again until the end of the presentation when we do that Q&A. So Dave, if you want to start your presentation, and I can disappear. I can disappear off the screen, and you.
Okay, thanks for the intro. I thought we agreed that what happened in Limerick would stay in Limerick, but that's neither here nor there. So welcome everybody to the session on selecting a medical provider for your event. My name is David Rock. I run a few different companies based here in the UK and based here in Ireland. Festimed being one of them, and RockDoc being the other. So RockDoc is a GP and medical practice based here in Ashburn and in Wicklow. I started off my career within the Limerick Ambulance Service on the frontline service, and then I went over to the UK and joined London Ambulance Service. So while there, I got a huge amount of experience in both trauma and medical patients, and indeed involved in various major incidents for various different levels. From there, I trained as an emergency care practitioner, so that gave me a load of different skills and skill sets. So I was able to work in A&E departments and hospitals, as well as out on the road and frontline response teams. Throughout my career, I then careered into the private sector and opened up an emergency ambulance service, supplying ambulances to the NHS, which went quite well before I came back here to Ireland in 2012. So that's a little bit about me. As we said, if there's anything in particular that you want to discuss along the way, just raise your hand and Mark can answer the questions, and then I'll jump in. So let's just talk about a little bit of the event medical market. So there's three kind of main companies that provide medical to events. The sectors and organizations will be from either an event medical company such as ourselves, a voluntary organization, which is, there's many of them, Red Cross, Order of Malta, St. John's, Civil Defence, St. Andrews, and there's a few others as well. And then obviously there's private ambulance services based in both UK and Ireland. So there's that's the three main areas that you can go and look for your medical provider for your event at. There's no one better than the other or worse than the other or anything else. They just offer very different levels of care or experience, and I suppose it's up to us as event professionals to decide which one works best for us. But one of the most important bits on choosing your event medical provider is to make sure you can actually work with them, irrelevant of how good or bad or indifferent they're going to be. You need to be able to have the relationship with them to make your event come off as one of the best events that's ever been delivered. And to do that, you need a good medical provider, a good security provider, a good rigging team, good health and safety, and all the little bits and bobs. But the most important part is that they can all talk to each other and all work together as one big team, because as we all know at events, it's one big happy family. We don't see each other from year in, year out, but yes, when we do see each other, it's as if we've never left. So make sure that whatever provider you're using is part of that family or part of that team. There is obviously the opposite side of that is we do need to make sure that they are regulated and that they are who they say they are, and that they can deliver what they say they can deliver. So one of the first checks I suppose we need to look at is our registered bodies. So for the UK, it's the Care Quality Commission, CQC, and for Ireland, it's FEC, Pre-Hospital Emergency Care Council. So both of them are run by the government and are independent to any private or public organisation. So they're the regulators that we refer to, and you need to make sure that the companies are regulated too. So both these organisations run reports and inspections on the medical providers. So with Care Quality Commission, you have your CQC report, and recently introduced to Ireland was the GVF, the Governance Validation Framework by FEC. So both of these inspections take place independently with various assessors. They come out and they look at the processes, your policies, your staff, your clients, your patients. They look at the full scope of that company. They make sure from a quality aspect that the policies that the company has reflect what they actually deliver. So there's some very interesting articles and parts that if you look at the reports, that will jump out and you go, oh, I didn't know they went into that level on such a thing. Obviously, it's there to highlight what they wouldn't be as strong as. So you'll always find a few negatives and you'll always find a few positives. But the important part is that they're working to a quality standard. Obviously, in the UK with Care Quality Commission, CQC, they have different powers than the Pre-Hospital Emergency Care Council in Ireland, but both organisations are there to regulate the industry and make sure that the people that are delivering care is safe, efficient, and within the country's guidelines. So they're the kind of two regulatory bodies that you need to do your due diligence and make sure that you've checked to see this company is a legitimate company being one, and secondly, that they are regulated to provide the service within the UK or Ireland. So within the UK, it is not a legal requirement to have CQC registration if you're not transporting patients to A&E. That's a little bit of a bone of contention. So what that means is that if you have a medical provider that's not CQC regulated, and you have a patient that needs to be transported off-site, i.e. to the local A&E department, or indeed home, so anywhere off-site where the patient is going to be traveling in the hospital off-site, so not on a private ground, so in public area, they do need to be CQC regulated. If you're transporting on-site and only from, we'll say, main stage to the medical tent, then technically at this time, you don't need CQC registration. So there is a little bit of a gap there. Some companies will bring in CQC regulated companies to do the off-site transfers. Then some companies like ourselves will we would go through the Care Quality Commission registration and inspection and revalidation process on it. Within Ireland, it's a bit of a different system. So under the FEC guidelines, you have to be a FEC registered organisation for your staff to practice, so the paramedics, technicians, etc., advanced paramedics, to practice within this country. So the individual clinician needs to be registered with FEC, and the organisation needs to be registered with FEC. And that's for all levels of care, from EF4 all the way up to advanced paramedic. So they all need to be regulated and registered with that organisation, so with FEC. So slightly different between UK and Ireland. As you'll see as this presentation goes on, it can get a little bit complicated between the small little differences between the UK and Ireland with qualifications and such. But in the end, patient care is patient care, events are events. It doesn't matter if the main stage is on the Isle of Wight, or Dorset, or Dublin, or Malahide, or Cork, or Limerick. It's the same event. People come to see a festival, see an event, enjoy themselves, and some of them unfortunately will get sick. So the patient care is the same, it's just the regulatory bodies can be slightly different. So if we look at FEC as an example, so if you go onto the FEC website, which is www.fecit.ie, PHECIT.ie, and click on the Clinical Resources tab, and then on the left-hand side, if you click Approved Service Providers, the next part you need to click is the highest grade of staff you're going to have on site. So if you decide, and your medical plan or your risk assessment decides that an advanced paramedic is required, then you need to click the advanced paramedic. And what that will do is it'll bring up a list of all the organizations that is registered as an advanced paramedic level to practice. So if you pick one of the technician levels, you'll have more companies that are available. If you're a paramedic or advanced paramedic, some lesser companies are available. So it changes and of who's available to regulate it, who's registered with the organization. So that's one of your due diligence checks that you'd need to do to make sure that you actually have the right organization on site. If you do not use a registered organization, it means the clinicians cannot work within their scope of practice, because they are limited to the regulatory bodies of where they can practice to and what level that organization practices to. Okay. So I hope I'm not losing anybody along the way here, but that's kind of the first level of checks that you need to do. So once that aspect is done, then you look at the individual clinicians. Now, with GDPR, there is a slight issue there of, if you ask a medical provider for their full staff list on the event, some will give it to you, some won't. Should we be sharing all our staff's details with event organizers? Yes, no, indifferent. You just need to be aware that there's limited information that can be shared at times to stick with GDPR. But another way of approaching it maybe would be on the day to go up to the medical organization and say to them, right, you have your advanced paramedics ambulance here. Can you just tell me the name of who the advanced paramedic is? And once they tell you the name of the advanced paramedic, you can then go on to the FEC register, website, click under the register, and then check the register, and then type the person's name in, and that will give you a list of who the person is and the qualification and the PIN number and when it expires and all that sort of stuff. For the UK, the HCPC is the paramedic version of the register of FEC. So you can go on there and you type in then the patient's surname, you pick the qualification, and it'll bring you up where they're registered and all that sort of stuff. So that's for pre-hospital staff. So if you look at doctors, the General Medical Council or Irish Medical Council, IMC, have a similar sort of check system. Nurses with NMC in the UK, NMBI in Ireland. As I say, paramedics would be the UK's HCPC, Healthcare Professional Council. Physios and radiologists also come under HCPC. And for Ireland, it's a little bit easier because most of the pre-hospital staff would come under the Pre-Hospital Emergency Care Council. So that just makes that a little bit easier. So I wouldn't suggest you do this for all your staff, the medical provider that's on site, but just from an event organizer showing due diligence, just do a random spot check and pick a random name and just make sure that that name is actually what they say they are. Luckily, it's decreased in the country of the amount of not so legitimate companies that would say they have an advanced paramedic or paramedic on site, and obviously then when you go and check the PIN number, that advanced paramedic turns out to be a technician or the like. So you do need to be aware and trust the organization and build that level up, but you're still bound by due diligence. So that's the pre-check due diligence. So what level of care do we need to put on site? So we need to do an event risk assessment. So that risk assessment has been a bone of contention for many, many years within the event industry. If we look at the old framework that was here in Ireland, or the old purple guide that was in the UK, for a number of years, it picked a very specific level of care that was needed, number of staff, number of ambulances, etc., that was needed for your event. So you scored if it was in the summertime or the winter time, if it had off-site, if it had camping, if it had risks, all that sort of stuff. So the Purple Guide did away with that for a good number of years because of the risk level and various other aspects, but it was down to the individual medical organization to decide what they felt the most appropriate level of care on site was, and as a whole that worked quite well, but unfortunately that was sometimes was exploited by both event organizers and event medical company, where when you were trying to compare one quote for another, that became very difficult because there was very different levels of care on site, but obviously the bottom line changed depending on the level of care. So with the latest chapter, chapter 5 of the Purple Guide, they have this risk assessment. I think it came out about last year sometime, I think it was. And now they've put a scoring matrix in and a risk assessment through. So what they've said is that the clinical activity, so how many patients do you expect to be seen? Is it a very low number? Is it a low number, medium, high, or very high? And you score it on that. The expected level of patient acuity, so how sick these patients are they going to be very low sick? Are they going to be low, medium, high sick, etc.? The expected levels of drugs and alcohol problems. So historically, has this event caused a huge issue with A, B, C, D? So you can look at a heavy metal concert compared to a rave. It brings a very different level of clientele, and that clientele brings a very, very different alcohol and drug content. So then the expected levels of violence and disorder. And violence is not just physical assaults. You also need to kind of consider mosh pits and the like when it comes to violence. Although it's not violence, it is clashing of heads and bodies. So you just have to take it into account. So what does that mean? So if you scored any higher than number 1 on any of them 4 questions, then you would have to go for the next level up, or the next level up, or the next level up. So if you got all greens, first responder led service, so first aider type level. If you got a few yellows, paramedic or nurse led, reds, doctor, or purple, emergency medical led. So it's a very different level of care that may be required on your site as your individual. So when we go on, if we use paramedic as the example, or nurse led, a small event, typically 2,000 to 10,000 attendees, low risk of huge problems. So you might want 1 to 2 paramedics, 2 to 4 nurses, 2 first responders, 1 manager. You might consider plus minus a doctor. You probably won't want your site ambulances on site and response vehicles and stuff like that. So it kind of goes on depending on what you need and what the purple guide kind of suggests that you may need. But like I said at the very beginning, you really need to be looking at engaging with that medical provider, build a level of trust, and understand what their capabilities are. Because the purple guide, this is literally direct from the purple guide, it's only there as a guide. Guides are guides, they're not laws, they're not rules. Obviously, when you go outside of them, you have to justify why you went outside the guide, and if it's a justifiable reason, even if it's not a positive outcome, if it's just a justifiable reason, sometimes that is acceptable. But you just need to remember that it is the guide. You need to rely on the experience of both you as the event professional and the event medical provider to ensure that the level of care on site is appropriate for your event. To give you an example of 2 of the festivals that we cover in the UK, if we look at, let's say, Camp Festival and Isle of Wight Festival, they're 2 very opposite ends of the event market. So one is designed around children, and the others are designed around well-behaved adults. So they're 2 opposite ends of the scale. However, from a risk level, they're more or less the same, even though it's not half, but close to half the attendees that go to one compared to the other. But because we bring children into it, the risk goes up, the level of care we need on site, the level of acuity we need that we're going to get presented with will be different. So from a risk level, you could have a very similar risk level for 2 very, very opposite ends of events. So that's why you kind of have to work with the medical company and the event organizer as one to see what does this event actually entail and what does it actually need. So that's kind of a little bit of a purple guide. Most companies do their own risk assessment along with it. Some of that risk assessment is based on a matrix that they might use, but majority of them we use is on experience. So just by talking to the event organizer, you get a feel for the experience the event organizer has, which will then give you a feel for how well it's going to be run, what security protocols are going to be put on site, what pit management is going to be there, egress, all that sort of stuff is going to come into it. And then you can kind of then predict the number of patients that you're going to get based on what the event organizer is going to give you. Obviously, that can change. Fireworks landed on crowds and stuff like that will have a very different impact. That's predictable, but not predicted. So you do have to have more than just the bare minimum on the site. But I suppose what I'm trying to say is talk to the event organizer, talk to the event medical provider, and get the 2 of them to come up with what they think is most appropriate for the event. The risk assessment is one aspect of it, but delivering the care is the more robust aspect of it. And you just need to really make sure that the event organizer and the event medical provider are in tune with each other and talk to each other. Sometimes off the record, sometimes on the record, but in the end, the level of the care on site needs to be met for the requirement. And if one is not talking to the other, then it can go very wrong. Okay, so One of the points that come up a fair amount is in relation to medical posts. So what do we need on the medical post? Where does it need to be? What size does it need to be? Why do we need it? All them sort of things. There's very different opinions out there based on the provider that you use. So one of the models that we use here in Festimed is that the main medical post should be on the, if you say it was an overnight camping event, where the camping comes to the main arena, in and around that area where the two areas change over from campsite to arena, that to us is the ideal place to put the medical post, because generally there's a good egress to get out of sight. The people and the festival goers pass by the medical post every day, twice, 3 times a day, going back and forward from their tent. So subconsciously they're aware that where the medical tent is. So then when they do need it, they go and see it. There's very few festival goers will actually, before the event happens, of find out where exactly the medical post is or how to get it. It's normally they rely on it when they need it rather than they predict that they're going to need it. So having that in a high thoroughfare location kind of allows the public to have it in the back of their head that it's there if I need it. So why is that important? Well, if they don't know where the medical tent is, then the number of responses around sites increases, which increases the workload on the medical providers, which increases on the control room, the security, the stewards, etc. So if the public know where it is, majority of the time they'll self-present to it. If they don't, they'll go to the first person in a high vis and go, "Hi, I need a medic," and then it goes to control, goes to the medical controller, the medical controller dispatches the team come out, and that's all time. By putting it in a visible location that they have to pass by, that cuts down on a lot of them calls. So we reduced our calls by 68%, I think it was, by just putting the hospital, the event hospital, in a viewable location on a thoroughfare. The other reason that we're saying between the campsite and the arena is the arena is closed during the day. So if you have an area, if you have an area between campsite and arena, that's available then 24/7. So when you try and move medics from one location to another, and equipment and all that, again, you're just increasing manpower, which is increasing the bottom line and increasing the cost. So location is quite important, and signage on that post is also really important. We put quite big event hospital signs up or medical center signs up on the side of our marquee to identify where it is. So it's not just about the health and safety guidance on first aid sign with spotlight in a particular size, particular location, etc. It also needs to be something at ground level where people are actually able to see it when they're passing it by. So some event organizers or event medical companies put their main event hospital by stage left or stage right. Although it's normally a very good egress route, it's quite difficult to treat patients in that high noise and intensity environment. So from our point of view, we prefer to have it away from the main stage. We do set up medical posts at the main stage as casualty clearing posts to be able to come in and out and treat patients initially, but that's as much as we'd really put in on the main stage side. So then the other topic that always comes up, oh, we need 5 or 6 or 7 first aid posts. That's not right and it's not wrong. Again, it comes down to the style of your medical provider. Just like the location of the hospital, all it is my opinion. And if I give my opinion on multi-medical posts, people might disagree with it. But what I feel is the least amount of medical posts, the better on site. Now, let me quantify that. So if you have one main medical post where all your staff, the majority of your staff, are able to treat and refer mass casualties, then that is a lot more effective than spreading your staff thinly around site. So if I have 5 or 6 first aid posts or medical posts all the way around site, I'm going to have to resource them. And I'm going to have to resource them enough that they can deal with multiple patients. So if I resource them in an adequate way, at some stage, one of them posts is going to get overrun with multiple patients, be that by the big top or the main stage or whatever else. One of them posts is going to be busier than the campsite post, which might be really, really quiet during the day. So the model we follow is that we put high grade, high level of staff, multiple quantities in one location. That model is very, very similar to what happens in the real world. So if we look at an ED department, a hospital, we don't set up multiple ED departments all the way around the city or the county. We generally set 1 or 2 posts up that can deal with mass casualties, rather than setting up a load of smaller units that can get overrun quite quickly. There's no right, there's no wrong answer. It's up to both the event organizer and the medical provider to decide what's best fit for that site. We'll always have your pinch points, as I say, your main stage or your big top. You know, if you put a medical post there, they will be busy, and you can put extra staff on it. But having majority of your staff, i.e. your consultants, your doctors and nurses and paramedics in one location, with response levels going out to take from the smaller locations back, it works as well. Access and egress is really, really important. And if you have something like your main stage post, where it's normally quite good to be able to get out of, and that's all well and good. But if you have your campsite medical post, and so you do get somebody who will say a severe allergic reaction or something like that, you need the ambulance to be able to come in, get the patient, and get out quite quickly. So you do need to bear in mind that the sterile routes or the blue routes or red routes or whatever your organization calls them has very good access to the medical posts. If that medical post is by a main bar, just remember that they have multiple drops and deliveries, and that could block the access for a considerable period of time. Or if it's on the main thoroughfare, the showers and the toilets, when it comes to the emptying of such, then that again can block your access egress. One of the areas that always causes issues for the whole site, and not just for medical, is when the vehicle curfew goes in during egress. You can very easily cut off your medical posts from your main medical. So kind of try and bear that in mind for access routes. Sometimes even given a longer route back to the medical post, that you have to go off-site and come back on, even that it will be more effective than trying to get through on a curfew. So bear in mind that is a big thing. When we're talking about curfews, I'm just going to very quickly touch on blue lights and sirens. So you really need to make sure your medical provider doesn't cry wolf continuously when it comes to lights and sirens. They should only be used for life-threatening emergencies and not just for getting around site. There's a lot of companies out there that just like to use blue lights and sirens for everything. And my logic on that is, if you're going to a serious patient, a life-threatening patient, you're going to want the security and stewards to clear your route for you and to assist you. They'll do that if they haven't saw blue lights all day. But if this is the 10th time you've come through these stewards on blue lights, they'll just go, yeah, come on, here's another one going through. So you do need to make sure that there's a blue light policy on site, and that it is adhered to. So another one of the issues is the turning circles and on the trackway. Ambulances generally have to reverse up to the back door of the medical post or the back door of the main medical center, the event hospital. And the reason for that is patient privacy and patient speed. So if you try and bring them up the front of the ambulance, bring them through, and you do have the lovely press that and social media photos that will be put out there of your event is full of drugs and horrible alcohol and stuff like that, when in actual fact it's not. It's only minority patients, which we get on a Saturday night normally in town anyway. So just think of patient dignity and privacy. So turning circles are quite important, that the ambulances can park up, reverse up to the vehicle, and also park by the hospital to gain access. Crowd density, it's very difficult or very hard to gain access to the medical area if you are based in a highly dense, crowded area. So if you are slightly off the big top, and that's an area that has a huge crowded area, you're not going to be able to, your patients are not going to be able to present to you. So that location becomes pretty useless. Then you might as well have it backstage in a sterile area, rather than taking up your footprint of your events, which can be sometimes lucrative real estate when it comes to vendors and etc. So just think about where you're putting the medical tents, the auxiliary medical tents. Security on some of the busier events is definitely required. The medical post can become a target for sitting down, relaxing if it's raining and all that sort of stuff. You can also, misconception that there's drugs and alcohol, drugs available inside the hospital, and sometimes it can be seen as a soft target. So having one security guard or two security guards or stewards on the front of the medical tent is useful. The other side of it is that patients with some medical conditions can become quite aggressive and cause issues and may need to be restrained until police arrive or Gardaí arrive. So having security on the front gate, they can be called on quite well. And the last point on this goes, the medical post is welfare. So if you have a separate welfare provider, having them close by with a back entrance through from medical to welfare is quite useful. Now, obviously, both organizations need to be able to work together as well. But the welfare aspect will, one, pay dividends on your client's experience, and two, won't overrun the medical provider with patients that just need a safe place to recover in. So most medical providers will downgrade some of the patients, so they'll keep them in for an hour or two, and they're happy then that the drugs have worn off or the alcohol is worn off or whatever is worn off to a level that the person is now safe to be discharged. But they're not happy for that person to be discharged to nobody back in their tent by themselves, because they might be a vulnerable person or whatever else as a result of the condition that they have. So in situations like that, having a welfare provider that can take over that care at that point can be really, really useful. But they need to have experience within that sector. It can't be just somebody that lectures patients, or they do need to give the TLC bit on that aspect. So that's kind of about your medical posts. What we suggest would be some of the considerations to take into account. So if we moved on to risk assessments and medical plans now, this can be quite a large area of litigation and content, and you just need to be really, really clear that all events really should have a medical plan written, designed and executed as part of your event. So one of the questions that I was asked very on within the Irish industry was, well, who should write this event medical plan? Should it be the event organisers? Should it be the health and safety reps? Should it be the medical provider? Should it be the statutory services such as the HSE or the NHS? Who should actually write this? Well, what it all comes down to, who's delivering the care. So if you have a medical plan, what you're saying to the world is, this is how we are going to deliver our medical care. So can that be written by anybody bar the medical provider? Because if you put unrealistic expectations on your medical provider and you document that in your medical plan, and it does go wrong, your medical plan and who wrote the medical plan, that's who will be liable for it. So your medical plan should really be written by the medical provider, and they need to have a really good understanding of what they're writing, what they're putting down on paper and declaring to the world that this is how we're going to run this event. If you understaff your event, or if you overstaff your event, so if we overstaff it, it'll cost too much. If we understaff it, it won't cost too much, it'll cost a lot less, but it'll put you at a risk. So the level of staffing, again, it needs to come back to your medical provider to look at it and let them decide what they feel is appropriate based on the skill set of their staff and that the level that they're putting in. So if I put 40 first aiders on one event, and that was the highest qualification that I put on, the risk would be quite high, because the most majority of them patients that will be presented, that was quite serious, will be referred off site. If I put paramedics, advanced paramedics, nurses, doctors, consultants on board as part of that risk assessment, I can decrease some of the junior grade levels of staff because I have a discharge process. So I can treat more patients on site, I can discharge them, and they don't have to be transported to the local emergency departments. So with your staffing levels, you really need to look at and make sure that you do have the right level of staff on site. And again, that's going to be reflected on your risk assessment and your medical plan. So you're going to put in the medical plan, well, this is how we risk assessed it, and this is what we feel is the appropriate level of care and cover for this event. That will also include not just qualifications of staff, but it'll also include number of vehicles, number of response units, and the like of that on site. So if you're going to put bicycles on instead of buggies, you need to look at risk and say, well, is the bicycle going to cause less damage to someone if it crashes into compared to a buggy or a quad? So all these considerations need to be taken into account when you're writing your medical plan and put it in. If it goes wrong, this document will be called on. This document will be either your get out of jail for free card or the one they're going to hang you with. So you do need to make sure that it's robust enough to cover majority of eventualities, but not just that it also actually lays out what you're going to deliver. If you get it wrong, you could be corporately liable or even civilly liable for the content of it. So it's a really, really important document. It's not just a copy and paste, although the content is very, very similar on most event medical plans. It really does need to be drawn down what exactly are you trying to deliver. So when you look at the medical plan, you can't just look at the organization that wrote it. So if Vestimed write a medical plan, you need to look at, on top of that, who the author is. So if I write it, I know that I've written enough medical plans to be robust enough and to protect both the company, my staff, and my client, my event organizer. But it's not all organizations will use the most appropriate person to write the plans. It could be a junior grade. So if I got one of my technicians to write a medical plan, well, they haven't gone through the ins and outs. They haven't seen the issues and concerns and loopholes that you kind of have to make sure that are there. So you really need to look at who's written the plan and not just the organization. So although Vestimed do quite big events and festivals and marathons and the like, that doesn't mean that the person that wrote it has that experience. So you need to look at the individual author of that, what experience they have, what sort of reputation are they known in the industry, what baseline qualification and baseline medical qualification have they got, are they new to the block, do they have any experience within event medical as a whole, internationally or nationally, and have they actually acted as a medical coordinator in the past at events. So these are all the things that you kind of need to be drawn out of the medical plan, and not just take it, oh, well, it's come from X organization, so it must be good. Break it down, look at who wrote the plan. So there's just a quick example of some of the stuff we put in our medical plans. Now, it does change from country to country. So what's the UK market want is different to what the Irish market want. The end care is still the same, but the requirements and the involvement from the statutory agencies sometimes can be a little bit different from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So you really sometimes need to engage with the local statutories to ensure that the medical plan does comply to their local processes. So that's about the medical plan. So what we'll just very quickly touch on is on qualifications. So this is where sometimes it gets a little bit difficult. So a medic is a generic term for all medical qualifications, be it from quite junior all the way up to quite senior. Ambulance, clinician, all these names are generic terms. So when we break it down, what qualifications is a technician or an EMT any different than an AP? Is a FREC level 4 any different to a FREC level 5? Is a CF4, an EF4, an AF4? There's all acronyms in the medical world, and they love to use it. So I suppose what you need to know is what these actually mean, and not be misled to the level of training. So if we look at an EMT, we're looking at about 20 to 25 days training compared to an advanced paramedic, which can be up to 3 years training. So the level of care, the level of understanding, the level of experience is very, very different. And it's not just the the training aspect of it, it's the exposure. So if we look at some of our EMT staff, they don't get to do 909 work too often. So they might have dealt with 1 or 2 or 5 heart attacks in their whole career. Where when we look at our paramedics and our advanced paramedics, they deal with that most of the time in a day or a week. So the level of experience and qualification is what you need to be looking at, and not misled of, yeah, it's an ambulance and it has 2 medics or 2 crews or 2 ambulance technicians or 2 people. You really need to break it down and say, well, what are them 2 people? Is this a technician ambulance? Is it a paramedic ambulance? Is it an advanced paramedic ambulance? So if you look on the graph there, you'll see the Irish and the UK qualification. So if we look at an Irish advanced paramedic, that's very, very similar in level of scope of practice and care as a UK paramedic. If we look at an Irish paramedic, that kind of comes across to a UK technician or FREC, or a few different IHCD and stuff like that. If we look at an Irish EMT, that comes across as similar to the UK ECA. So they're the kind of the main ones that you'll kind of see, and the regulatory bodies obviously will be different associated with them. So I suppose this slide here is one that would be useful to print off and just look at when someone tells you that there is an EMT on the ambulance or emergency medical technician, what that actually means, how long they get trained for, and where they generally work. So it can be a minefield, and to majority of public, the word EMT means nothing to them, or AP. So you do need to kind of be aware of the different qualifications out there. So do I need an AP or advanced paramedic or doctor on site? Why can't the EMTs? They're there, so what can they do? So when it comes to the AP and doctor, where the usefulness and the benefit of them comes in, and this is not an exhaustive list, but if we look at you have a person having a query chest pain, well, potentially that doctor or advanced paramedic may look at that person and say, well, actually it's muscular. We've done an ECG and there's non-ST elevation, heart attack, or it's not a heart attack, or whatever else, or the amount of painkillers that they can give is very, very different, whether you're an advanced paramedic, doctor, technician, paramedic. So the likes of your advanced paramedics or paramedics in the UK and your doctors can give morphine to the patients. Your advanced airways, they can put tubes down the throat to isolate the airway and do that sort of stuff. I suppose if we look as a very quick look as a paramedic compared to an advanced paramedic for Ireland, or a technician compared to a paramedic for the UK, you're talking about the difference of 15 drugs to, if you're an advanced paramedic, to 56 drugs. So the level of medication that can be given to your patients is hugely, hugely different. Can they clear spines? Can they clear soft tissue injuries? All that sort of stuff. But as I said in the beginning, the big difference is experience. So your advanced paramedics and paramedics that work frontline services, they're very well used to dealing with trauma. They're well used to dealing with car crashes, complex medical conditions and stuff like that, where some of our technicians that wouldn't have the exposure to the patients, but might have the clinical training, but wouldn't have the exposure, will deliver a different level of care. So ambulances. So we talked about the individual qualifications, but when we look at ambulances, well, an ambulance is an ambulance, so it doesn't make any difference. If we look at the pictures there, they're all very similar, but in actual fact, they're very, very different. So you have a patient transport ambulance, which is a very, very minor level of training. Sometimes it's a driving course with a few days of a first aid course type thing with patient moving and handling. Or it could be all the way up to a paramedic level or advanced paramedic level PTS service. Excuse me, you have intermediate care services by the HSE and by the NHS. And they transport generally non-emergency patients, but they're still emergency, so they still need to be moved from one location to another. You have a paramedic ambulance, which is the majority of ambulances in the UK and Ireland, and some of them will have an advanced paramedic for the Irish and for a paramedic for the UK, which have the full array of drugs, medication, and airway techniques. So from the outside, they all look the same, but it's what the medic that's inside it that makes the difference. So don't just presume because you have an ambulance on site that's capable of treating every patient that may present. So you really need to break it down and go, okay, you have an ambulance, but what qualification of a medic is in that ambulance? So if we look at the patient transport ambulance compared to a frontline emergency ambulance, the content is also different. So in a patient transport ambulance, it has chairs, a first aid box, and a stretcher. Where if we look at a frontline 999 ambulance, it has loads of cabinets, loads of cupboards, loads of bags, loads of equipment, loads of oxygen. So it's a very, very different level. But from the outside, it might look identical. So you need to find out, yes, you're having 2 ambulances on this event. What level of care are these 2 ambulances delivering? So if we look at Motorsport Ireland as an example, so we do a fair amount of rallies throughout Ireland. Generally, there's 2 EMT-led ambulances on each stage, so each part of the track. And there's a doctor or an advanced paramedic based in a response car to go with that. And then they'll travel with the patient if it's serious, or if it's not serious, they'll be transported just by the technician crew. So you need to look, yes, it has an ambulance. What level of care is that ambulance actually going to deliver? So local versus national versus small versus large, that's not the important part. Whether they're based on the footprint, at the entrance to the footprint of site, or they're based in another country, that's not the important part. The important part is, can they actually deliver the care that they say they can? Sometimes just because it has a local branch, so when we look at some of the voluntary agencies throughout the UK and Ireland, they might have a local branch based in that town, but in actual fact, the volunteers are coming from all over the country. So then that whole supporting local then kind of goes out the window, and it makes a difference on that side. So just look and see what care can be provided locally, and also do they have the experience to deliver that care. The most important part, and it is my pet hate when it comes to my fellow event medical professionals, is if you as an organization say you're going to cover an event, you have to cover it. You know, your staff calling sick, your ambulance breaking down, your budgie dying, whatever excuse you're going to be given, that's irrelevant to you as the event organizer. If you commission the service, they need to deliver the service. There's no, oh, well, what if? I'm sorry, that doesn't exist. If I'm commissioning you to deliver a service, I want the service. So whoever's being commissioned to deliver it, you need to make sure that they can guarantee you the cover, not just, yeah, we should be okay. Yeah, no, it'll be fine. If a major incident is declared, we might have to be redeployed. That doesn't help your event. You have legally obliged to provide the medical care at your site, so you have to provide it. If the company can't guarantee you the cover, then the company can't be commissioned, because if you cannot open your site if you don't have medical cover on site. So make sure that if they say they can do it, they actually can do it. I go out of my way to try and help event organizers when they ring me on a Friday afternoon to say, my event that's happening tomorrow morning, the local organization that was commissioned has just told me, sorry, they can't cover it. And most of us will go out of our way try and get that covered, because we understand that cancelling an event, be it a small event or a large event, has financial implications, reputation implications, and implications on everybody's workload. So that even then you're ringing around staff trying to get cover at the last minute and trying to get vehicles that are already committed to other contracts cover for that event. So make sure that whoever you say is you're going to commission, that they have to do it. Don't be afraid to put financial penalties if they don't turn up. So if you commission such and such a group and you say, well, I'll agree to pay you this amount. If you don't turn up, I'll expect you to pay me that, to pay me to provide the alternative provision. and then you might be more guaranteed to get the cover. Having a service level agreement will forgo a lot of this stuff. So making it very, very clear in black and white what we require, what we want, and if you don't deliver it, this is what will happen. Or if you as the event organizer don't provide the information, the medical provider won't take responsibility for it, or they don't pay, and that sort of stuff. So having a service level agreement is probably really useful when it comes to your medical provider. Cost versus cover. Most companies charge for the services, be that a voluntary agency, a private agency, an event medical company. Most of us charge. We all do some free events for good causes and stuff like that. Please don't be offended when the voluntary, private, or event company say, sorry, we can't support your event. Potentially they've supported 5 or 6 other events that year for free. So they can't do every event for free, and some people do exploit that, unfortunately. So just remember that the event company generally, as a rule, will either charge you directly through invoice or what's known as donation. Make sure that the word donation, you know the financial implications of what donation is expected or will be demanded as a result of providing the care. So just be really, really clear. Again, it comes back to your service level agreement. What am I asking for? What am I getting? What guarantees am I getting? And what do you expect as a result financially for delivering it? Prices vary. So just because they're the most experienced doesn't make them the most expensive. But generally, they won't be the cheapest. So if you have a one-man band, their overheads are a lot less than someone like ourselves, which has bases in the UK and Ireland. So you do need to look, price does need to be part of your considerations. I wouldn't give a percentage of how important the price is. That's between you and your companies, but you get what you pay for. If you pay very little, you're going to get very little. So price is like everything in life, you get what you pay for. So just keep that. It does apply to medical. Experience on medical is your big driver. So does the event medical provider have experience in this sector? Can they deliver what I want them to deliver? If the answer is yes, and they're a little bit more expensive and not hugely expensive, then maybe that's probably the right company. But just because it's the cheapest doesn't mean that's what you're going to get. The other thing people get caught out on is, oh, well, sure, we never had it. We've done this now for 5 years and we've never had anything. They've always sat there drinking tea all day. Doesn't mean that your next event is going to not have the heart attack or the stroke or the medical conditions that are not even associated with any risk on your site, not alone trips, falls, hazards and stuff like that you get on site. So just remember that just because it didn't happen before doesn't mean it's not going to happen the following year. One of the things when it comes to cost that comes in and we talk about is, well, we'll just put one ambulance on site instead of a medical post. Us as a company don't like to put ambulances on site as medical posts because you're kind of putting an expectation on the clinicians and indeed the patient or the relatives or the parents to transport that patient. So if I give an example of a 2-person crew, a standard ambulance crew, say advanced paramedic led and an EMT led ambulance, and they go out and they cover a horsing event which has very little risk and it's just a small little community event and they never got anything in the last 5 years. And all of a sudden on this event, this person falls, breaks their arm. We're there treating the patient, and all of a sudden now this person needs to be transported to A&E. Actually, we'll say a leg instead of an arm because potentially they could go a different way. So they broke their leg. You have the patient sitting in the back of your ambulance, and you say to the event organizer, yeah, this person needs to go off site. So it needs to be referred to the emergency department. If that ambulance leaves site, you need to stop the event. But not only stop the event, you need to evacuate the event because you're not going to have medical provision on site. So the conditional license of having medical provision is now gone. So what do you do? Well, you call 909 and the HSE or the NHS will come out and you'll say to them, yeah, the address is such and such the patient is inside the ambulance. And the controller will go, sorry, they're inside the ambulance. What ambulance? Or we're the medical provider on site. Well, can you not transport? No. Why not? Because if we transport, the event has to stop. So you're causing a huge bit of conflict there. The second thing is when you have the distraught parent that's sitting beside you with this child with a broken leg, they're going to go, I want to go to hospital. Why am I waiting for an ambulance to arrive? Well, because the event needs to be cancelled if we leave. Well, that's not my problem. My child's in pain. I want you to treat my child. So you can get very bad press very, very quickly by just having the ambulance on site. So having a dedicated first aid post or medical post, be it in a trailer or a marquee or a tent or a room in the area, that prevents that conflict that happens. So I'm not a big lover of using ambulances as medical posts or vehicles as medical posts as a whole, just due to the expectations of the family and the event goers. So GDPR, almost there. We'll wrap it up quite shortly. When it comes to GDPR, this is where it always becomes a bit of a bone of contention. Well, what can we share? What can we not share? This person hurt themselves on my site. I'm entitled to know what treatment you did. I'm entitled to know that person's name, address, all that sort of stuff. Not really. One of the ways we get around it is if someone injures themselves that we feel is either a rider or there's a claim or significant injury, significant harm, we generally ask the safety officer to come down to the medical post and we discuss in front of the patient that this is such a he's had a little bit of a fall. Obviously, the patient consent has been got that we can talk about to the person. At that time, the safety officer, who's not bound by the medical aspect, can take the person's name, address. If they feel suitable to take photos with the patient consent, then that's, again, it's not from the medical side. But as a medical provider, we cannot give that data. We cannot give the information without the patient consent, and that has to be legally in writing. So once the person leaves site, you as the event organizer would email us and say, we've had an insurance claim from such and such who injured themselves on your site. Please provide the medical notes. We still can't release the notes. We still need to get physical paper or email consent from that person before we can release it. And they don't have to allow us to release all the information. So having your safety officer come out to some of the more significant injuries on site is very, very useful. But just with GDPR, it's always a bone of contention and data protection before that of what can be released and what can't. So basically, try and get your safety officer on site is what we're saying. And the last topic I'm just going to quickly touch on, because I think we're running out of time here quite quickly, is just red flags. So when it comes to red flags, try and get your event organization to watch out for these. So if you have 2 or 3 diarrhea or vomiting coming on your campsite or your multi-day event, you really want to know where that's coming from, because potentially you have a poor food quality person on site. So you want to get them closed down before it has an impact on all your site. The same goes for if you're getting a lot of wounds or sprained ankles from one particular area, then that area you're going to want to send your safety team down to find out why people are falling. Is this preventable? Can we stop the next person? And also to document and photograph the actual area. The same goes for allergies or if there's a particular drug going on site. So in summary, what we're saying is talk to your medical provider, build a relationship up with them, trust them, get them to trust you, you trust them, and build that up. They need to be able to manage the whole event from a medical aspect. They need to be your point of contact. They need to be your liaison between you and the statutory services. They need to take ownership of the medical and not just leave it to the event organisers. Most important thing, they need to guarantee that they can give you the cover and that they'll turn up on the day, and make sure that they have adequate insurance. So I don't know if you're still there, Mark, but from my side, I think that's the main part of the presentation. So I suppose
still here.
Over to you, Mark.
Still here. Okay, of course. Do you want to knock those slides off and then we might fill the full screen? There you go. Yeah, super. Thank you for that. I don't know, Dave, were you having any opportunity to watch the chat there, but people have been helping themselves and asking various questions and agreeing and disagreeing. I think one of the things to say is there's this natural, I think, is it tension? I don't know what the word is, but there's this thing in the industry whereby, as an event organizer or the people planning the event, for every service, I need to know I will get what I pay for me, for my client, that it will be there, that there's service level agreements or there's agreements in whatever way agreements are done, and I will get it. For medical to operate any differently, and in some respects it does, and it tries to, and historically it has, and that's mainly around the voluntaries and the way they work. Like, that just doesn't really work from a client or an organizer perspective, especially with something as important as medical. I can't be in a position where I don't know if the cover is there. I can't be in a position where, whoever's providing my cover won't give me a plan. So that's what's been happening, I know, in Ireland a lot in the last few years, and developing and changing. So I think you're right about that. Speaking from our perspective, and I suppose we'd often be the ones directly contracting the medical and advising a client on who to bring in. And these are conversations you have regularly around, look, I know you used to use such and such a voluntary, but here's what our advice is. And our advice is usually around that guaranteed cover level. And I know Matt put up in the chat there some wording from an unidentified voluntary service provider's contract, which basically says loads of things could happen and we might be called away to deal with it off-site, or the state services might need to dig out, we might have to go. And like that, like, I've never seen that in a contract for voluntaries here, but that is literally the type of thing that when we bust our... You okay? When we bust our balls...
That was not being busted.
No, that was my child being busted, just as I said busted. Okay, she's not happy. Give me 1 second. Can you just talk to that the cover level being guaranteed is too critical for us to rely on kind of voluntaries who may or may not get that?
Yeah, you kind of, if you're going to commit to providing the event, you have to provide the event. And I understand there's the private, the public, and the private ambulance and event ambulance or event medical. There is a different service that they're all providing, and part of the contingency plans for some of the statutory services is that the voluntary agencies will come in and assist, and they need to be available to do that. And I agree with the principle. But that doesn't change your event on your day. You have commissioned that service provider to provide a service, and they have to provide that service. They can't leave site. That's just not an option, because if it does, it's leaving you exposed, and it's leaving the event medical provider exposed as well. So everybody gets exposed. And I know we all want to do our best in a major incident, and we have to do our best and come back together as a team. But in the end, if you don't deliver the care that you say you're going to deliver, somebody is going to suffer. And although you're helping out on the major incident, you are commissioned to provide the medical cover at that site. So you have to provide the medical cover at that site. So I suppose that's really important. But I see a question there from Tony, just in relation to the summary type of injuries after the event was without providing personal data. This will help to eliminate the potential risks in future years. I think absolutely. I think providing a debrief document or summary is always useful, and it should be forthcoming. It shouldn't something that you kind of need to ask for multiple times. It does give you an indication of what sort of medical impact that was had on that event. But just bear in mind that it all depends on what the level of care that you have on site will depend on the number of patients you referred off site. So one provider, without mentioning a particular festival, they transported 70 to 80 patients off site the year before we started. The year we started, we transported 15, I think, or 12, 15 or something like that, because we had an ED consultant based on site. So it's a different level of care. So just bear in mind with debriefs, they're useful, but it's not always a reflection of what you're going to have the following year. But certainly for trends and stuff like that, really, really useful document. And me as an event organizer, if you can give me a debrief from the previous years, I can kind of get a feel for the event.
Thanks, Dave. It would be typical that when we're on the medical webinar, my daughter would decide to take a hopper off the couch. She's okay. She just got a bit of a fright. There's a question there I have a few questions that people have sent me as well. I'll get to. I'm just scanning down through the list now. Dave, do you ever use the National Ambulance Resource Unit Event Resource Assessment when planning levels of cover?
The National Ambulance Service, yeah, we do. We engage with the HSE quite heavily on our Irish events, a lot more than we would with the NHS and our UK events. But yeah, we definitely do engage with both National Ambulance Service and the HSE and the frameworks attached to it.
Christian was wondering about a situation where maybe an event organizer, without involving a medical company, involves maybe a doctor or nurse, kind of high-level medical people to work directly with them. And again, is that something that works? Would there be a liability issue there, or if you contract directly with a doctor or a nurse who really knows their stuff, maybe for something specialist like a marathon or a running event, where they're just maybe they're runners themselves, they're really into it, could they lead the cover, or would you still maybe want a company in the middle, even from a liability or insurance perspective?
If it works, it works. That's all well and good. However, it's a recipe for a litigation disaster. Who is taking responsibility when this goes wrong? That's basically what we have to be aware of. If God forbid it does go wrong, who's taking responsibility for that? Is the ambulance company going to blame the doctor? Is the doctor going to blame the ambulance company? My advice is always commission one company, and if you want multiple companies on site, get them to manage that one company to manage all the providers on site, take over our responsibility. So you as an event organizer can go, sorry, Dave, I know it wasn't your guys that mucked up, or it was your guys that mucked up, but you're the event organizer. I've commissioned you to do it. You're the medical coordinator. Your fault. You deal with it.
Yeah, that's one thing worth mentioning, actually, and just to make sure things come across properly, is that quite often when you're contracted to deliver care for an event, that care delivery could involve a range of voluntary resources and everything. So this isn't a case of professional versus voluntary. Quite often it's a mix of both, but as you said, it's about maybe having that professional management of the delivery. So again, if I'm the organizer, or if I'm contracting you for my client who is the organizer, it's all on you as far as I'm concerned. I don't care if Mary is from St. John's, because that's where you chose to bring her from. You're providing the medical, as you said. My SLA is with you. So from my perspective and my client's perspective, it's on you.
Yeah, and again, your single point of contact. I've worked with events and where there's multiple medical providers and there's not one very clearly defined lead from client to service delivery. It's a disaster, because everybody's fighting for the same rubbish, and you kind of go, lads, who's in charge? Where does the buck stop? Yeah. Because there needs to be. Who are you
going to be shouting at when it goes wrong? Because if that's me, let me do it the right way. And there was a few questions come in. You were saying, you made a point, and someone wanted to clarify this, that say you have an AP, but who's working for an organization who aren't registered to AP level. Does that then mean they can't act to the level of their training? Was that the point you were making? Does that make sense?
Say that again there, Mark.
I think it was when you were looking at the registrations for companies. Mm-hmm. So if, for instance, there's an advanced paramedic, but he or she is working with an organization who are only on the FEC register at EMT level, does that mean that AP can only operate for that company to EMT level training, if you get me?
Yeah. So,
which I would think, in practical terms, treating someone is a very difficult thing to be trying to draw the line in your head, what you can and can't do from a technical perspective, when you know what you can and should do from your actual training.
No. Okay. Yes and no. The CPG is more a skill based, so your clinical practice guidelines, the guidelines of how you're going to treat every patient that the FEC or the HCPC, JR Calc deliver. So that kind of says, if you have this person, you treat it with this. The clinical knowledge to come to a decision is there regardless of what skill you're going to use. So majority of the time that's fine. When you get yourselves an issue is if you need to clear a spine, or you need to give morphine or give that sort of a drug. If the organization the clinician is working for is not registered to that level, they cannot practice the clinical practice guideline to that level. Okay. So although they're qualified as an advanced paramedic, the organization has tech, you cannot give them morphine. It's a sticking point, but the guidance is very, very clear. The company that the clinician is employed for you can only practice to that level.
Yeah, no, yeah, and I think that's important as well, because I think, and again, you'll know better about the UK, but I know here, I mean, quite often, the bodies that voluntaries are able to provide largely depends on I guess who's available and who fancies doing a voluntary shift or whatever, and it could be that they only committed to EMTs, but all of a sudden, that there are APs available or whatever. So I think that can fluctuate.
Majority of the voluntary agencies will have minimal paramedics, some advanced paramedic levels, so sometimes that doesn't come as much of an issue. But we also just need to make sure that if that is the case, and it's not something to do regularly, so when you have a doctor on an event, that for a company that wouldn't be that level, who's taken the medical malpractice insurance aspect of it? Is it that doctor delivering the care? Is it the organization, or even the public liability aspect of it? So again, you're getting into sticky ground. So really, before the event, you need to decide what you want on site, what level of care what you want on site. If they give you higher levels, it's kind of irrelevant to it on point.
But they could work to their higher level in the case of an emergency. Yeah.
But only if the governing organization is registered.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. Manish is wondering, is a simulated casualty drill a part of the deal, or do you need to put that in the contract? I guess that's kind of asking about the equivalent of tabletops, really. Do you guys ever insist that there are kind of tabletop type simulated drills as part of your deployment on an event?
For large scale events, tabletops are very, very useful, and it's not so much a very structured formal process, although most of them are. Actually, just having the security, the stewards, the different levels around one table or multiple tables, and talking about, well, what would happen if a plane crash landed in the middle of your site? How would we manage? What would happen if the double-decker buses that were parked up, one of them went up on fire? And what you can get from that a lot of the time is, well, the older agencies that are around site, they'll help manage it. Where on the real world, if I was to say I want a marquee built in that corner within half an hour to an hour, on the real world, that wouldn't happen. But on an event site, that happens. And I want 25 buggies to help transport these patients. Again, real world, that's not going to happen. But at a festival site, all of a sudden, resources that you wouldn't have predicted are available, all of a sudden are available. So having that level on site is, tabletops work. Tabletops are really, really good when they talk about incidents. And we talk through what would we all do if. Tabletops for the sake of having tabletops, no, that doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I think tabletops, given the proper amount of time and buy-in from the right people, whereas you said things get discussed and teased out. I mean, you know me, I generally think what I think, and I'm probably fairly set in my opinions, but I've been at tabletops where, given the opportunity for people to talk through things, I've been convinced that my way wasn't the best way, or that there is a better way. But if you're just rushing through tabletop to tick a box, you're not getting the value. Whereas if we can all talk and chat and figure it out and go, oh, now I get where you're coming from. I still don't fully agree, but yes, I get why you would prefer it done that way. So let's meet in the middle somewhere,
Part of the UK Safety Advisory Group meetings, SAG meetings, and generally the last one is your tabletop, and they're really, really useful. And the same over here in Ireland. They're useful, but they need to be ran by the right people and delivering what you're actually going to do
properly. There's a very long question which I'm going to come to just in a second. One of the other ones that came in is, I know you're taught in different governing bodies and regulatory bodies across the UK and Ireland, but the question was, can they spot check at an event? Can they come and just check that you're delivering what you said you deliver, or that your people are the people you said you'd have? And that's specifically about those regulatory bodies, the likes of FEC and whatever. I know we can have, the local authority can have license stipulations and they can check on that, but could you have any of the regulatory bodies land in and go, hi, we're from FEC? Yeah, okay.
So there's two aspects to that. There's the regulatory aspect and the HSE NHS aspect of it. So HSE NHS generally do turn up on site a majority of the bigger events from their own due diligence and also their own liaison outside of it. And then the regulatory bodies, so like the FEC and the Care Quality Commission, part of the governance, GVF, and part of CQC inspections, they have to be part of looking at what your care is. Now, for FEC, it's a lot easier because they can do all care, including events. For CQC, it's a bit more different because they can only regulate the aspect of leaving the site with the patient in the back to hospital. Now, if the example of the event I used where we only transported 12 to 15 off site, they stayed there for 2 days with us and we didn't transport anything off site, and that was just pure unlucky. We would prefer them to see a patient being transported because,
but
like you were saying,
going to create a patient just to keep them happy.
But they do come to site on events. FEC, they part of the GVF. There's 2 aspects to theirs. One of them is doing the office-based inspection, and the other is doing the actual ambulance and staff inspection.
I'm just sorry. I'm looking through questions that I noted that people sent in. I think your presentation has covered off some of them, so I'm just trying to make sure we're not wasting time. I'll go to this. Is a long one now, and there's a lot of context to this. I don't know, have you read it yet? But let's see what your opinion is. Last year, when supporting on a mass participation event, the decision was taken that the event needed to be cancelled. Various very valid health and safety reasons that came up last minute. Fair enough. There were many participants on site, and the medical team were on site too. Some of the participants said they were going to try and complete the event themselves. From a duty of care perspective, I kept a limited number of resources on hand in case of any issues. But when I spoke with the medical team, they said the moment the event had been cancelled, their insurance wouldn't apply as it was no longer an event. Is this standard for all private medical providers? Never experienced this before, that Event Medical stops the moment an event is cancelled, even though people are still potentially involved. Again, it's a very specific thing, but based on the information there, it seems a little odd to me.
I don't want to pass a litigation comment on that. I'm a little bit taken back by it. It's not ringing a bell, and normally that sort of stuff we kind of get around quite quick. That event's not ringing a bell with me, both UK or Ireland. I think you, as the event organizer, whether you're commissioned, event medical organizer, whether you're commissioned or non-commissioned, if you're on site, you have a duty of care. At what point does your duty of care stop? If the event is cancelled, and I've been on events where events have been cancelled and indeed not paid for. But you kind of make sure that you're one of the last people to leave, or the level of risk is down low enough that it's safe for you to leave. In the event, in the end, I suppose it's the event coordinator's role to decide if you can leave or not. Whether you leave, if something happens, I suppose you need to be able to sleep at night time. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, I think it's a tough one to comment on because it's so specific. It's not a situation I've come across, and it's not. And I know we work with you, but we work with others as well. Like, it's not an attitude or an approach I can think of any of our medical suppliers having with us. That's not really the way they think, unless there was some change in their insurance and this was drilled into them that if it's cancelled, get out of there. It's nothing to do with you. I don't know. I'm
one of them sad people that actually read the insurance documents, and I've never seen a clause in it. And I'm not saying it wasn't this thing, but I can't see circumstances where the event organizer you'd only be allowed to practice if you were commissioned. A lot of the work we do a fair amount of events for free, so on the same local, then on the same thing. So any free events that we do, are we not covered? Well, we are. We know we are.
Neil, don't be apologizing for the length of the question. It did need context. I just don't think we've given you really. I guess the answer is it doesn't seem to be, from what we can tell, it's not a common position, but there may be more behind it. You could only tell us as much as you could tell us, I guess, in a paragraph there. Ray has
Neil, if you want to talk to me offline on that, I'm happy to assist. David at festimed.org, and we can arrange a call.
If the client had volunteers that were qualified and they wanted to assist during the event, would it be practical to ask the medical provider to use that resource in support of their own provision?
No. Who's in charge of them? Whose governance do they come under? If there's a medical malpractice, who's responsible for it? Have they gone through DBS or Garda checks? Has their certificates been validated? Have they done inductions? What standards are they working to? As a whole, absolutely not.
I think, Neil says he'll talk to us offline about that other one, so that's fine. No, Ray, and I think, look, we've all come across this, and it's a bit like, I always kind of compare this one to one Dave might be slightly less familiar with, but it's a bit like the local festival who come to us and say, oh, here, me brother-in-law is an electrician and he's going to get us a generator, so that'll be grand, won't it? And you're kind of like, I genuinely get where that's coming from. I get that you're probably trying to save a few quid, and it makes perfect sense to you that your brother-in-law is an electrician and might have a generator. But no, to do this properly, to have it right, it'll cost a little bit of money, all right, but you want a recce cert, you want a proper generator, you want to make sure it's not petrol. The logic of we have qualified volunteers, surely they can save us a couple of quid and get involved and get experience. I get it. But as Dave said, there's so much more to it from the point of view of if they're involved in something or if something goes wrong, or how does Dave know that they've actually kept up their training since they got the thing? Like, I guess Dave and people like Dave need to be able to vouch for the staff and know the people that are coming and have their paperwork in the office and all of that kind of stuff. It's actually more of an ask than it sounds to say, well, look, we have 3 people who are CFRs. Can you use them? You know, it's a much bigger ask than it sounds like, I guess. It's
you
not
have
like
something simple like a hurty foot, and the ankle gets dislocated or fractured or whatever else. It's a very highly technical term.
You've been dealing with kids already today. A hurty foot. You have a hurty foot.
If that person, you bring the person to hospital, you call 999, or the first aider on site does whatever.
Yeah.
And there's a claim that goes in, because majority of them, that's what ends up happening. If that treatment wasn't adequate or proven not to be adequate, or they made the fracture worse, who's going to pay the bill? Your insurance company will go, we don't have medical malpractice insurance, you shouldn't have treated them. So you're opening a can of worms that you're going to lose.
It's not worth it for you, but it's organizers mightn't realize it, but it's not worth the risk for them either. But I guess, and I'm not trying to put words in his mouth, but I guess that kind of a request is probably more likely to come from maybe those events that don't have a load of professional involvement, perhaps. So, you know, the local committee doing the local festival and have done it well for years and are always trying to leverage relationships and stuff to keep costs down, which I perfectly understand. As you said, you guys do a lot of event cover for free. We would do a lot of stuff for free too. So I get bottom line as well. And there are places, and I think you just want providers you can trust. I mean, I would trust that if I bring you in for a client, you will be providing what you deem professionally to be the level of service we want, but it won't be costing us and the client more than it needs to. It will be costing what it costs to do well and do right. And I know that if there are ways of saving that don't compromise cover, that you're already in that headspace and everything. This isn't about the money side of it. On medical, it's much more importantly about, you know, the cover and how you can vouch for those people, and whether Dave can stand in court and go, look, you may think I was wrong, but they're my staff. We train them. There's all their paperwork. They know what they're doing. Maybe they made a mistake here. You can decide that, but I know them. I employ them. They're mine. And that's what I want and my client wants, is that the medical stuff hangs on you. You go to court. You convince the court. Thanks very much. It's
your insurance policy. So their problem, not mine. And on that, just something you said there just triggered. The way I do our quoting structure, it's not a, well, we'll quote higher than we need because we know we're going to get knocked back.
Yeah.
If we put a quote in and we say it needs X number of staff and X number of vehicles, and that event can't pay that amount for whatever reason, and there's a lesser event, lesser quantity goes in, something's going to give.
Yeah.
So you'll have less medics on site than was originally required. And then it gets to the courts and go, well, there wasn't enough staff on site. Yeah, I know. It's not what I told you that.
I told them. But could there be this might be the wrong question. Does that sound like then there could be a situation where you would be asked what it needs, you would say X and Y, they would say I can afford A and B, and now you have a decision to make about whether you think A and B can work and you'll do it, or is you like that is the next step? You can take that view and go, okay, this can work with A and B. I would have preferred X and Y.
And we try to
proceed with the event.
We try and work with them and say, well, look, I'll tell you what, this is a new event. Let's do it at this price this year.
Right.
And I'll give you the extra cover. But next year.
See, that's important. That's important to me. And I guess that's the crux of what I'm getting at. Is that a business decision for you, but you would still be putting in the X and the Y? Or is it that you can accept and take a little bit of a chance on the A and the B that they can afford? You would put in, right, okay, so there'd be some middle ground there where you'd put in a bit extra to give yourself a better feeling about it.
I would say about 10% of the cases that I'm asked to quote for that come back and say, I need you to be at this price, we go, we're not the provider for you.
Right, okay. Yeah, I get you. Actually, one thing I wanted to reiterate as well that you did touch on was about, and I know you and I have discussed this and at conferences and stuff before, where you say that I shouldn't put my faith in my medical operational plan has come from Festimed. I should be checking who within Festimed wrote the plan, because if Dave was off working the Isle of Wight and some numpty in there did it, I shouldn't be a happy client. And I think I would echo that. That's critical. We have always, well, I say always, for the past 4 or 5 years, we've done something quite similar with our event management plans, in that there's a primary author and a secondary author. So
Yeah.
I don't want people to just go, oh, it came from Safe Events, it might be all right. I want people to actually look and see which of us wrote it and which of us was kind of sense checking their work and what two were involved. So that's why we list the primary and secondary author, because I don't want people just going, oh, well, Safe Events have done stuff before, we know them, it'll be fine. Like, if I'm stressed and busy and I give it to a junior person to do, it definitely shouldn't, A, I shouldn't do that, but B, it should not hold the weight that, you know, maybe myself or Martin having written it should. So I think that's a very good point that people need to kind of come in.
On that note, then, if you look at the medical plans, are generally written by one of the most senior clinicians, management level of the company. That's one aspect that you need to look at it. Yeah. I write all our medical plans for our company, but if you look at who the event coordinator in Ireland, or the medical commander role, or whatever phrase you're going to use for the UK, look at their experience as well. Who's the person who's going to be your liaison on the day? It's not always the same person.
Yeah, and that's fine. And it doesn't have to always be the same person. Excuse me, but they do need to be, I guess, fit for purpose. They do need to be experienced in the bit that they're doing. And I think it's important that all agencies and stakeholders realize that that doesn't have to be the same person. Like, it would be up to you, I would think personally, as a provider, to make yourself comfortable that if you wrote the plan, but Mary is delivering it as the medical coordinator on the day, like, your internal processes that are checked by the regulatory bodies they're checked by need to cover off you making sure Mary knows everything in the plan that you wrote. It's not for me to insist that you be on the ground necessarily, because I don't think that's realistic. Go on.
And indeed, that person that's on site, I might be on site as well, or just arrive on site. So that person still reports to me on site, but yet they're reporting directly to you. So it can be different people.
Yeah. There's a question here that I'm slightly going to rephrase, because I think you've boxed a lot of it off. The question is, as a medical provider, what are the main pieces of info you'd like to have or must have in order to produce a medical plan and risk assessment? You covered a lot of that in the case, so in the presentation. So I'm going to tweak that slightly to say, tell me the things that I or my client or an event organizer client mightn't think you want to know, but are actually important for you to know. Things I wouldn't automatically maybe expect that Dave would need, but that are actually helpful for you in figuring your end of things out, which I think is a different question.
Crowd dynamic is the big thing. What sort of crowd are you expecting? You're saying you have such a band on, and you're expecting teeny boppers, but that band does 40-year-olds that haven't taken drugs for an awful long time, and we know they're going to take drugs at this event. Right. So that sort of information, the intel on the event. The big thing for me is the event organizer's experience, because they haven't done this sort of event before, and they're all of a sudden being thrown into this event. We're going to get in trouble because they're going to not foresee some of the issues. So if you have a health and safety officer, for example, from a building site that then decides to be the health and safety or event organizer for the festival, they're not going to have learned the hard lessons, and we're going to end up with multiple patients from various mismanagement aspects. I think that would be the biggest thing. The crowd dynamic is the big thing. What are you actually expecting?
Yeah. Not number. It's not just a numbers game. It's what type of people. I think it kind of comes back to, it's a bit like people ask the same of health and safety. They go like, when do you need to be involved in planning, or when do you need to be involved in the conversation? Like, just talk to us as early as possible. Like, if I had a client come to me with something new, or if it was a new approach from someone I don't even know, for me, I'm quite likely to pick up the phone to you and bounce something off you, or go like, how does this sound, or roughly, what kind of I know the information you would need to even roughly give me a sense of the cover that would be needed for something. But ultimately, you and I might decide, I'm just not convinced this girl knows what she's doing. I'm getting a bad vibe about this gig. And that's not to say it won't go ahead, be amazing, and be on the calendar for 40 years. But you can only go on I guess, and you and I are similar that way, the vibe you get, what they've done before, maybe what people in the industry think of them if they know them. I mean, people forget the industry is very small, especially in Ireland, but it's small enough in the UK too. But like, we all talk, you know, we'll all ask, have you worked with them before? Does she know what she's doing?
What are they? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
like,
they're
like
tough
work, but they get it done, you know.
I overcook events like that where you know you're not getting the information, or they're saying that it's a 4,950 crowd, and you know it's going to be 10,000.
There's a question here that came to me privately, and I've been rereading it, trying to figure out how to ask it. And in fairness to the man who sent it in, he started off with, "I don't really know how to ask this," and I'm not sure I do. I think it's a question around support networks for your own staff. Say, we're just taking you as an example because you're the person delivering this presentation, but I guess if they have to deal with, I think this person had an experience where they might have seen young medics or first aiders have to deal with something quite serious, as serious as it gets, I believe, from reading this. And I think their query is like, what duty of care you or people like you would have then to those young people who hope they never see anything like that in all their time working, but did early. And I think this man's experience is that there was nothing for, you know, they were just expected to suck it up and get on with it, I guess. How do professionals tend to approach that? That's a risk. I suppose you could have kids, I say kids, but you could have people deal with something that shocks them. They're not for a period of time any use to you. Perhaps maybe they need a break. So you have to build in cover and support for them.
I suppose that's a kind of a two-prong answer. So the first part of it, I suppose COVID actually really changed this as well. Internally, for what we do with our staff, and that's all I can really comment of what we do and what I know majority of companies do, but not all. So we'd have an internal counselling process. So we employ a company to do an employee assistance program to provide face-to-face or remote counselling for each member of staff if required, not just on work, on marital, financial, anything, and they're nothing to do with the company. So that's one aspect. We also, you look at a critical incident stress management and that sort of stuff. So we'll have trim assessors within the company, counsellors within the company and stuff like that have been gone off, do the job frontline themselves and know how to talk to people. Or have a cup of coffee or a pint afterwards and go, well, that was a crap job, wasn't it? What did we learn? Hot debriefs are really important for them sort of things. What's going through people's mind, all that sort of stuff. When you look at the trim assessment tools and all that after the event, they're really important because what impact has this call had on this person's life? Which in turn is having an impact on your other patients because they're suffering as a result of this. So you kind of have to look at that. When you involve kids in it, and although I
said kids, but you know what I mean. I think his point is the younger end of, you know, there could be teenagers, 16, 17, 18, whatever.
Yeah, well, 17, 18, yeah. Some organizations do bring cadets in, and there is definitely a place for them, but you need to be really limited to where they get exposure. A cadet should not be seeing a critically ill patient, should not be seeing a serious patient, an open wound, all the nasty things, because we don't know what impact it's going to have on them. We don't know what support network they've had previously and they're going to have afterwards. I was a cadet in one of the volunteer organizations many, many moons ago. So I suppose I'm kind of contradicting myself, but there is a position for them, but not at local, hugely low risk events. Yes. Anything where they could see serious trauma, absolutely not, or serious medical.
You might, for the sake of those of us who don't know what trim is, because Neil has made a point here. He says trim is great, not heard of it, commonly used in the event sector. So you might just explain what that is.
Trim, there's two aspects to it. So basically, cutting it all down, what you do with a critical incident, whatever that incident be it medical or non-medical. I think it's purely medical, but it can be reflected on anything.
Point is it's critical,
you do a hot debrief, and that's part of it. You do a cold debrief, that's also part of it. It's looking at the assessment. It's about 5 or 10 different questions that you answer on two aspects. What impact is it having on the life now? What impact has it had on this person's life after the incident? There's a risk matrix associated with it. There's a fair bit of stuff on Google, or if anyone wants to email me, I can send them out loads of information on it. Trim works. Trim is really, really good. However, here's the caveat. The most important part is just talking about the incident with somebody. that understands the incident.
Yeah.
Before trim, before all that, back in the old ambulance driver days, going for a pint with the lads and having a chat about that horrible child cardiac arrest that you had and how you dealt with it and did you do everything right, and you second question everything. That's just as important as the structured process. So talking about any incident, for our point of view, if you have a major incident or anything significant or a death on your site, I would suggest, as the event organizer, speak to the medical provider, get them to come in and have the debrief with the staff, the volunteers, that get them involved in it.
I think things have developed a lot. I mean, we would be similar to you guys. We'd have an employee assistance program with an awful lot of that kind of stuff that we extend to our kind of our part-time crews and stuff. And look, a lot of people won't use it, they never will. But I think you're right. There's a lot to be said for just talking to anyone about it. And quite often it's the talking to people who maybe dealt with it with you or, you know, have been in situations like that. So other event friends or whatever. I think the talking it could be structured talking or it can just be venting over a coffee or a pint. But I think the talking, it's like everything else, and we always preach it. Maybe we don't always do it, but talking, sharing the load, all of that is critical. I know one of the first things I'd ever dealt with back in the day, and it was in a swimming pool environment, and all I did for about 2 or 3 hours, I just swam afterwards. So I was just in the pool on my own, swimming up and down just to get my headspace. And I was due to have an assessment for a French class or something that day. So the support I got as such were, you know, my colleagues and the people running the facility ringing the French department, explaining what had happened and going, I don't know how the academic side of this works, but he's in no headspace to be doing that today. He's still in the pool. And that's what I needed. And then I talked about it later that evening with colleagues again, and I was fine.
And that's
the talking I found. And I'm awful for talking. I don't talk about anything really.
Mark, to talk to you in a pair of Speedos in a swimming pool, I'm sorry.
Dude, I'm like a fish. I'm like a fish. If anyone still has questions, throw them in, because I think I'm hitting the end of what I've written down and the ones we've marked as Q in here. I think we're getting there. I think that one I have, that one we've just launched into this, that I think I figured out what the man was trying to ask. He's come back there saying that is what he was trying to ask. So I think we did well on that one. I think, look, we've said this on a lot of the webinars lately. Anyone, you know, if David said get in touch offline and to go through things, feel free. Again, I know Dave, he's a bit like me in that the worst that happens is he's busy. It takes a day or two to come back to you. But when he says get in touch, he means get in touch. So Neil, if you want to get in touch with us about that thing we were discussing, please do. I'm not seeing any. Let me just check.
I don't know if this will show, but
someone asked a good question along the way when you were showing there you go, David at festimade.org. So when you were showing the risk assessment matrix from the purple guide, someone made a good point. Surely something that's hitting the reds and has a very high likelihood or high likelihood of violence. Are you in a situation surely that just doesn't go ahead? Like, or is it possible that this is a loaded question? Can you have things that are that far into the red? Now, someone did reply in the chat, I think, and make the point that things like maybe protests, rallies, that could look like they definitely have that potential for violence, but will still go ahead.
Can you manage the risk?
Yeah, I know you don't want to get too caught off in colours, but you may be able to manage it. There might be a high level, there might be a high probability of violence, but if you're the cops and you can put in riot police, maybe you're happy and you've now managed that risk. So
yeah, I mean, it's not so much of if it hits a red, oh no, this is going to go wrong. It's more of the more likely of you're going to get a more serious patient that you're going to need to deal with. So it's not so much that it's going to go wrong. It's there's higher percentage chance of you having to do cardiac arrest, respiratory arrest, drug overdose.
So it's about being tooled up for that and ready for that and having the right equipment and people. And
it's but again, you kind of have to go off. A majority of event medicals and probably the same as health and safety, you kind of go off what you get a feel for the event and you just know what it needs more so than a formal risk assessment.
And that's actually a very good point to nearly be finishing up on, because I always make the point, and I'm like this, and you know Martin is like this. We'd love things to be extremely, extremely black and white. They're not always that way. And sometimes when you're paying event safety people or medical people to give their opinion based on their experience, you cannot take subjectivity out of it. So there's no denying that what you will suggest for me is based on your personal experience in the industry. and that the next person who does what you do might have a different take because of their personal experience. No one's right or wrong necessarily. It's about finding people you work well with, but it's always going to be subjective, as you say, and it's hard to quantify and it can make people uncomfortable. But I would often say as well, I have a feel for an event. I have a feel if something's going to go wrong. I can kind of sense if we're likely to have an issue. I don't know how else to describe that, except that here's my experience, here's my qualification, and it seems to be leading me to this vibe in this event.
And that's the problem, because again, like opinions and the same, which I won't say, but everybody will say, well, you need this, you need that, you need the other. In the end, it's whoever's taking responsibility for the medical, they're the ones that are going to have to stand by it. So if they've got it wrong, yes, you're going to be liable because you commissioned them. But in the end, the book stops with them because they're the ones that got it wrong, not you.
Very true. My colleague, Desi, is in the room asking, is there anywhere he can go to get the picture of Speedos on me out of his head? Which is your fault because you mentioned it. Desi, I would refer you to our employee assistance program, details of which I can forward on to you if you need them. I think you're not paying medical providers on a per patient basis. You're paying them for their skills, just in case. That's a fair point, Matt. There's also that thing, those memes and stuff you see going around that say, you're not paying for the hour of my time to write your plan. You're paying for the 15 years of experience that allows me to write your plan or whatever. There's a little bit of that in there too.
We're generally the only ones on site that the event organizers like us to be doing nothing, because if we're doing something, they get a little bit titchy. So
yeah, I know. I think that's a fair point. What was the last thing I scribbled there? Sorry, and I'll finish on this because there's no more questions coming in, which is good. We've answered them. And one thing you mentioned, which I know on the safety side we get all the time as well, is look, we've run this gig for 5 years. We've never had a major issue, so I don't think we need what you think we need. That is about the perception of risk. It is not about the actual risk. And it's perfectly natural, and it's a human thing, and it happens to us all, that if we've been to the event 5 times and nothing's happened, our perception of that risk lowers and lowers and lowers. The risk is still the same.
Yeah.
So if there's a big top there that in theory could fall down, but it has never fallen down, we're going to naturally, as humans, think, well, less risk, less risk, less risk. It's actually the exact same risk, and this could be the year it falls down. So if the risk is there, and it needs addressing. So that happens on the safety side as well as the medical side and on other sides. You get it with power suppliers too, who are trying to insist on backup generators, and an event organizer doesn't want to pay for them. I think we've all been on the events where they afterwards wish they had that backup generator. So sometimes if it's critical, and depending on what it's powering, it should very much have a backup.
Just remember, the risk will also change as the event develops. So year one of an event, I'll overcook it slightly to make sure we have the right level of cover on site, because there's too many unknowns. So as years go by, sometimes the level of cover goes down.
Yeah.
Because we have a better understanding of exactly what this event is. So
and again,
if you see in year one you have 40 staff and year two you have 30 staff, that's not because the risk has changed. It's just our approach to it.
Or because you can't get the staff. And again, it can be, there's a huge communication piece, both for your side of the house and ours, I guess, in that sometimes these changes, which are very natural and come with a greater understanding of an event. Like we've had it with even wildlights in the zoo over the years. We learn it, we drill it better, we tweak it slightly, and we can maybe reduce staff, or we can change how something works, because we want to work with a client and not be costing more than we need to cost. And that comes with learning. You can always, after year 3, look back and go, well, why couldn't we have had those 2 less people year 1? We actually couldn't. We were learning the event, and as we learn, we tweak what we need. And it could be increased costs, it could be lower costs, but the point is, we're learning it. We're learning that actual event. We're not basing it on other events anymore. We're basing it on this event.
That can work against us when it comes to legal claims afterwards, or statutory services, where they say, well, you had 40, why have you only 30 now? Well, we feel that's inadequate.
That's when we get to throw you under the bus completely and go, well, he should have done his risk assessment. If he dropped it to 30, it's not because he couldn't get staff. It's because he assessed it differently. We know the event. And that's where I'm hoping in my office that you have all your decision-making process written out on a piece of paper somewhere, and some insurance assessor gets to look at it and go, well, he's a professional and I can see why he changed from 40 to 30. So we're not paying out in this, lads. We'll fight this. And that's what you want. You just want the thinking And that's a fair point we need to say as well. So while I'm quite comfortable to say that it's a subjective, and it could be Mark knows it in his head based on experience and whatever, and Dave knows it in his head, we do still need to document the thought process that leads to X change or Y development. Yeah. You need that written down somewhere. And it can literally be, some of my notes on event files are literally just my scribbled thoughts going, okay, so based on this and based on that, and I'm going to reduce this by 2 and add 7 over there. At least it's somewhere. It's not that we arbitrarily did it. And I think that's important. These decisions have to be based on something.
If you look at a mathematical equation, the end result is not the important part. It's how you got there and documenting how you got there. And
it's what I can never understand about the Leaving Cert and the Junior Cert is
you can get the result
I got more points for how I tried to get the answer than whether I got the answer or not. I think we shall leave it on that note because there's no more questions flying in. I will thank you for doing this. And thank you for being open and answering those questions. Sorry, I'm just watching in case anything just jump in. Everyone else, thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend. We have another one. It's actually this day week. There's none on Tuesday. We have a rescheduled webinar next Friday around volunteers. And actually, that in theory at the minute looks like our last one of this run. So we're nearly there. Thank you for joining us. And again, David at festimed.org. If you want to talk to David offline, you all know where to get me. So have a great weekend and thank you for joining us. Dave, thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.